Thanks for downloading this episode of On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter @ontherecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com.
My guests today are Phil Gomes and Sam Ford. Phil Gomes, many of you may have heard him on this podcast several years ago. Today he's the Senior Vice President with Edelman Digital, and he works from the agency's headquarters in Chicago. And he has a special understanding of corporate social media governance, as well as the intersection between corporate communications and online community mores and expectations. He's an educator and a counselor with regard to online community engagement, and he develops programs and frameworks that enable account teams and their clients to integrate digital thinking into communication strategies and tactics. And most notably, he was the team leader at Edelman that guided the development of their well-regarded BELT system, which is an online learning system for delivering a global standard for social media capability, accountability, and decision support at the firm. We also have Sam Ford. He's the Director of Audience Engagement at Peppercom, an affiliate with both MIT Comparative Media Studies Writing and Western Kentucky University, and co-author of Spreadable Media. He's also co-chair of the Word of Mouth Marketing Association's Ethics Committee and was named the 2011 Social Media Innovator of the Year by Bulldog Reporter. He's a Kentucky Press Association award-winning journalist. And both of their firms were involved in a development with Wikipedia that we're going to talk about on this podcast. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Eric.
So let's sort of back it up for a minute and sort of start from square one here before we even get into the weeds. Talk to us a little bit about the conflict of interest policy and how it works and sort of why this became an issue in the first place.
Sure. I mean, your listeners have probably heard a lot of the discussion online with regard to corporations and public relations firms that represent them editing their Wikipedia pages in areas where they may or may not have a conflict of interest, or in Wikipedian parlance, a COI. Now, obviously, there's some ethical issues there, right? You don't necessarily, or I should say, you would want somebody with a more neutral point of view, ideally, addressing that particular entry. And so part of it, while there are some public relations operators that have tried to go in somewhat clandestinely and that sort of thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that Wikipedia is a hands-off environment for public relations professionals. Every Wikipedia entry is a so-called talk page where people can discuss the nature of the entry, and it's always appropriate for public relations people to participate in those talk pages. Unfortunately, what's been happening is not only do you have what I argue to be a small minority of PR folk who have attempted to clandestinely edit entries, you also have a situation where the rules of Wikipedia are also very complex, and they do take time they're not difficult to learn, but they do take time to master. And sometimes some misunderstandings have cropped up in that sense. And so that's why a couple of years ago, kind of recognizing that, this is interesting because all of the energy is pointed at public relations people. Very little of the energy is pointed to the conflict of interest in general. For example, activists will very often get a free pass if they're caught editing an entry. So I wrote an open letter to Jimmy Wales and Wikipedia talking about, can we have a rational discussion about public relations contributions to Wikipedia and not simply dismiss it out of hand. So that happened in January 2012. And with the help of Mr. John Cass, who is a marketer in the Boston area, we founded, I wouldn't call it an organization, just a group of aligned interests which we called CREW, Corporate Representatives for Ethical Wikipedia Engagement, because literally all the good acronyms were taken, especially the ones starting with the letter W. And then that not only attracted PR people, but Wikipedians as well, who either saw the value that a public relations person engaged in ethical practice might bring, but also saw that the ritual of public shaming wasn't really working as a motivator. Why not focus then on how to do things right? A couple of years after that, it was the brainchild of Mr. William Butler, principal of Butler Inc., who said, okay, well, like all good online communities, let's try to have a real-world experience of people sitting around a table and talking about this. And so he managed to convene digital leaders from the world's leading agencies, academics like Dr. Marcia DeStasso and Andrew Lee, who literally wrote the book on Wikipedia, Wikipedia volunteers, and we started discussing that maybe the best way would be to come together on a multi-agency statement. And so Sam can take it from here from his perspective in terms of how things went on during that day. But that's what brought us to the current topic.
Yeah, I certainly my background's in academia, and I do a lot of writing on participatory culture and places where people come together as publics online and collaborate, often in discussion with media properties or brands, but in discussion in and around them as well. So as you mentioned at the top of the broadcast, I have my background coming into this issue is on a focus of ethics in our profession. I've been working for Peppercom since 2007, and I still do work on the academic side as well. And I'm very interested in how PR firms and their clients think about our obligation, not just to the organizations we're serving who pay the bills, but also our obligations to the audience. And these are big issues in online community in general, questions of transparency and disclosure. But I find there are issues in particular on Wikipedia because of the prominence of the site, being one of the 10 most popular sites, I think number 6 in the world, because of its unique nature and the fact that on an entries aren't authored in the way that you engaging in another community would be, so it makes transparency even trickier. And as Phil said, there's also the complication of the fact that there are a lot of written and a whole lot more unwritten rules of engagement in the Wikipedia community that aren't necessarily that obvious to the outside reader, and which are in many ways smoothed over too much by a phrase like the encyclopedia anyone can edit. And my background really came at that larger ethical focus, and through my work with the Word of Mouth Marketing Association, came into contact with Bill and was really intrigued by this group of folks getting together, the work that had been done in CREW, and this idea of bringing together academics, members of the editor community, and representatives from a range of PR communications firms, because that sort of dialogue is basically what's needed to come up with something that's common sense that would help us figure out how we engage in an education campaign. So we came together in February in Washington, D.C., and spent the day, I would say, with the agenda of having a productive conversation, but not being too prescriptive about where it might go. But one of the things that came out of that day was the fact that on the Wikipedia editor side, and we heard from both the academics and the volunteer editors in the room, that they had heard far too infrequently from those firms who were trying hard to engage in the appropriate manner and abide by the terms of use and the policies and procedures, and just knowing that there were professionals who took this seriously, who earnestly wanted to engage in the way the site should be engaged in, might be a step in the right direction for having a productive conversation. But we also heard from the agency representatives in the room that in our field of communications and marketing, there's a deep need for more discussion around this, because a heavy proportion of the violations of those policies are by people who do so out of ignorance, that didn't realize necessarily what they're doing is in violation of the conflict of interest policy. And while there may always be bad players, we could do two things. If we could make a statement and put ourselves on the record as setting ourselves up to a higher standard, that would be good for our organizations, but maybe also we could educate our clients and other agencies as to why this is important, and why some practices they may have engaged in the past are actually a violation of the very ethos of the Wikipedia project. So we had that meeting in February, and over the course of the 3 months following, worked not only to craft that statement and then get sign-off from our various organizations, but also to figure out how we wanted to roll this out. So it was important to us that this was published first as a statement on Wikipedia. There wasn't a big press release that was sent out. This was a statement made in the appropriate place on Wikipedia, not by a trade organization, but by our companies directly. As far as I know,
if I could just interrupt for a second, Sam,
yeah.
What statement are you talking about?
Oh, sure. So we published a statement back earlier this month on Wikipedia that basically affirms that it is the current policy of our respective companies that we abide by the terms of use the Wikimedia Foundation has and the policies of the Wikipedia project. That includes all policies related in particular to conflict of interest. So basically that, as Phil was saying earlier, that we disclose who we are. If we have suggestions to make, we're doing so in terms of the talk pages and not making direct edits to pages. But really that discussion was focused on the fact that we have these policies in place, and that it's a priority for us to enforce those policies internally and educate our industry about these policies externally.
Is there any pledge as to what the penalty would be if someone at one of your agencies did not comply with the terms of use?
Not universally. Because I don't think that anyone anybody in that room could presume to make policy for any of the other firms. In Edelman's case, an admonition about proper Wikipedia behavior has been part of the policy since about 2010. And I don't think the right way to go about it is oh my God, somebody did something, hang them. I think if somebody is operating contrary to policy, I think that each organization should deal with it, in their own way, depending, I think, on factors such as how willful the infraction, how egregious the infraction, and that sort of thing. But I think to say that there would be like a universal punishment across all signatories, I just don't think anybody would actually presume, again, to make policy for somebody else.
I also don't think there's anybody listening to this podcast who would expect that you, sir, Phil, could manage to be in charge of. It's a big. How many people at Edelman? How many employees?
We're north of 5,000 now. So,
there's no practical way that you're going, that accidents won't happen with that many people. Somebody's going to make a mistake.
But at the same time, I'll say that we've gone through some great lengths, as have other agencies, to communicate the message.
Some of the greatest. Point taken. But what I wonder is, if you were to find someone who either because they were ignorant about the terms of use or because they were, blatantly outright gaming Wikipedia as a client service. I mean, if you found somebody who was doing that despite all the efforts you've taken, do you think would a person be terminated, or is there a past case where somebody has done that and was terminated for either of you?
As to the latter case, I'm not sure, and one doesn't come to mind. I mean, we've been communicating this pretty regularly. And as to the former case, I'm in really no position to say what would get somebody terminated at Edelman. But I will say that certainly in instances where those infractions might happen, there's certainly plenty of education material and that sort of thing available to an employee where if someone did happen to slip through the cracks and not get the message, it would be very, very easy to remedy and quickly. But I would also encourage that employee to go to the talk page and say, oh, by the way, I had made this edit or that sort of thing, just to sort of, balance the ledger very quickly.
Okay, so let's loosen the ratchets a bit, because I got it a little hot and a little tense a little earlier than I generally like to on this podcast. So help me, if you will, understand how the press is interpreting this news. I'm looking at a bunch of headlines here, and I'm looking at Ad Age, I'm looking at Time, I'm looking at Business Insider, and these are the headlines. Top PR firms promise they won't edit clients' Wikipedia pages. PR firms vow they won't try to game Wikipedia. Major PR firms agree not to edit clients' Wikipedia entries. So you've got those, and then you've got the Wired headline. And the Wired headline is, Wikipedia clamps down on paid editors and sock puppetry.
Two different pieces of news.
Yeah. Okay, so talk to me about the more current one.
Okay,
Wikipedia clamping down on paid editors and sock puppetry.
So, I don't want your listeners to take this as me attempting to apply causality where it may or may not have existed. But shortly after the Donovan House group, and this is what we kind of ended up calling ourselves, once we released that statement and started getting a lot of press, about a week later, the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the nonprofit that administrates Wikipedia, released an update in terms of so-called paid editing. Right? So it was an update to their terms of use about paid editing. That's what that Wired headline is discussing.
Okay, I'm looking at this update now. Talk to us about it. What's important about it? What do we need to know?
I would say
go ahead.
If you agree with this characterization, Phil, the update to the Wikimedia terms of use is very much in line with the statement that we had released. And while we didn't know that those terms of use would be updated, we knew there had been some longstanding discussion and plans to potentially update them. So to reiterate Phil's point, I think we realized our discussion was happening parallel to discussions happening within the Wikimedia Foundation as well about these issues, especially in light of some of the past very blatant infractions. But I think, long story short, it outlaws the sort of behavior our pledge was very clearly stating we don't engage in anyhow.
When I looked it over, what I got from it was, pretty much you've always been allowed to put on the talk page, hey, I think this is wrong, here's who I am, and I work for the company, so I'm not going to edit it myself, but I think it's wrong, here's why, here's a neutral third-party source, here's a link, I think you should update it. And so your statement is basically your agency saying, hey, we're all going to do that. We're going to make sure everybody here does that. We're not telling you what we're going to do if we don't do that, but, here's our statement. And then subsequently...
And one thing I'll add to that is the statement does say that violations of this policy will be dealt with according to the policies of each agency. So while Phil's right, nobody's going to speak. We all have different HR policies, and that is an HR matter. All the firms are committing that this is a part of the company's ethical commitment. It's part of our employee education, and that we will take any infraction of this statement seriously as an issue to be dealt with. We're not saying what the particular actions would be taken, because that'll differ from organization to organization.
But honestly, just to be frank, I don't know that would put anyone who has a good knowledge of the history of the public relations industry, including many of the firms that are signatories, at ease, because many of these firms have been involved in egregious activities for which there has been no accountability.
Well, and I mean, as I often tell people, we're going to do well by doing good. And obviously going into this conversation, public relations enters that conversation as a trust deficit, right? To the degree to which people not in the trade are aware of public relations, it's usually some combination of Samantha from Sex and the City, Tony Curtis and Sidney Falco in Sweet Smell of Success, and Colin Farrell's character in Phone Booth, some caricature of all three. And we recognize that that's the case. But like I said, I mean, we're going to do well by doing good, and hopefully we can get the message out there that there are a goodly number of PR folks and firms who A, want to do it right, and B, get it right a hell of a lot more often than they get it wrong.
Now, you were talking about problems with headlines. Several of the headlines implied or outright stated that it was the firms who signed on to this statement who had been the ones who were gaming Wikipedia prior, and as Phil had attested to, similarly with Peppercom, this has been our policy for many years now, and many of the agencies involved have had none, or to my knowledge, very few situations that have ever arisen in the history of Wikipedia related to these firms in particular. So one of the things we were hoping to do with the statement is to also try to help create a more nuanced public perspective that didn't lump the whole PR industry and all players within that industry into one category. But you can see from some of the press coverage that despite those efforts, there are still plenty who guessed by this. We were saying as of June, whatever, the day the statement was published, we promised from that point forward we were going to quit what we had been doing the day before. I've told people, I think that the bad image that we have in part is earned media on our industry's part, because we don't make ethics a part of our industry discourse nearly as much as we do strategies for effectiveness and the best tactics for having a social media campaign that gets the most impressions and that sort of thing. And so if there are people out there, our clients who are uninformed about this, or people coming out of school and into our firms, or professionals who are joining from another firm, one of the reasons they're uneducated about this is because we may have strong policies internally at many of our organizations, but it's not enough a part of the industry discourse. So while we made the statement in order to hopefully reach the editor community and Wikipedia readers, I think we also wanted to and have been quite pleased with the fact that our industry is having a more serious discussion on some of these issues, not as issues of just what's legal or what's compliance with federal guidelines, but rather in this case, what's the right thing to do and what would the community expect of us.
More on the PR industry's commitment to abide by Wikipedia's principles with Phil Gomes and Sam Ford after this. Up to now, most organizations have managed social media risk with a policy. Today, 80% of employers have a social media policy in place. 80%. That means almost every organization has a social media policy that its employees are expected to follow. The problem is, no one reads them. They sign for them and stick them in the bottom drawer. In fact, only 2 out of every 1,000 people read standard form contracts before signing them. That means your social media policy won't change anyone's behavior because no one reads it. At the same time, social media usage at work has become mainstream. Most employees use social media at work every day. Not just PR and marketing people, but everyone. Most employees use social media several times over the course of their workday. If they say or share something they shouldn't, and it's only a matter of time until somebody at your company says or shares something they shouldn't, your organization's reputation can be severely damaged. Now, if you're listening to this, you know social media meltdowns have become their own news beat. Every week, a new company is tarred and feathered for social media misuse. If you're in marketing or PR, you should know that at many organizations, social media misuse results in the reduction of digital marketing budgets and staff. So even if your department is knowledgeable on what is and isn't okay to do on social media, it's in your best interest to make sure others inside your company don't make foolish mistakes that impact your livelihood. Because if someone does or says something that gets your company in trouble online, your social media marketing activities are going to be scrutinized and possibly even eliminated. But there is something you can do to protect your company and yourself. You can make sure your people are trained in social media compliance. Don't be fooled. Social media compliance isn't just for regulated industries. Whether you're regulated or not, if you're not certifying your workforce in social media compliance, social media is a communications crisis waiting to happen. Now is the time to protect your company and yourself by ensuring employees understand their obligations to comply with your organization's social media policy. And we can help. We have the broadest, deepest library of ready-to-go, off-the-shelf social media compliance training courses that you can use to train, assess, and certify your workforce in social media compliance. Our courses are all pre-recorded, on demand with assessment questions to ensure knowledge transfer. You even get a record of who's been trained in what. We have courses on social media compliance, social media ethics, social media transparency and disclosure, social media privacy, desktop and mobile security, social media surveillance, and more. We even have training on how to use social media effectively for business. If you're not training your people in social media compliance, it's not a question of if, but when a social media meltdown happens on your watch. We have a solution for training, assessing, and certifying your workforce in social media compliance, ethics, privacy, and security. Social media misuse at work has skyrocketed in the last 12 months. Don't wait for your department to get downsized, your budget to get slashed, or your job to be eliminated. Go to complysocially.com and find out how we can protect your brand against social media misuse for as little as $5 per employee.
Phil, are you updating your courseware to teach this Wikipedia compliance to Edelman employees?
No update necessary. It not only has it been part of our online behavior policy for some time, but at the end of last year, I think that's when we rolled it out. At the end of last year, we rolled out sort of a companion piece to our online behavior policy, which was instead of being sort of a click and read that marches people through each step, what we do is we drop employees into these simulated ethical situations, and then they respond, A, B, C, or D, how would they react to it. And one of those simulations, among many, is Wikipedia engagement. So,
got it. Now, I have to because you guys, because it seems like to do what you've done here requires an incredible sense of optimism about the future of the PR industry in this world where there are few trade outlets left, and in many cases, we are the media for our clients. When you look at the economics of the business, when you look at the fact that the clients are still coming to you for specific deliverables, and in their eyes, your time is their money. What sort of education do you think needs to happen at the client level so that client expectations are not driving PR practitioners internally, either at the agency or independent practitioner level, to try to do as much as they can in a little period of time just to show value and keep the retainer coming in?
Yeah, well, that's where I think ethics come into play in particular. I feel like our industry as a whole has too often accepted the seat far too far away from the table of the key decision makers, that we've acted as vendors in places where we should be providing strategic counsel, and we have sometimes, in seeing ourselves as vendors, haven't done the sort of ethical due diligence as an industry that we should. And that would allow us to come back to our clients and give them much better guidance in the process if we see ourselves as true partners. And I can speak from firsthand example. We've had many clients who have come to us asking for things on Wikipedia that showed they didn't understand the site at all, and allowed us to be a strategic partner to help them understand. And we've also had plenty of clients who've gone elsewhere from firms who probably reached out to them and said, we can help you create Wikipedia pages for all those product lines you'd like to have, or fix those annoying edits that you don't want on your page, and they didn't understand why that was wrong. And I think it's a great opportunity for those who do engage ethically in our industry to prove our worth to a client beyond just that sort of time as money, vendor-based sort of arrangement that you've described.
There was a news break 5 days ago. I'm going to read you the headline. And this sort of gets into a claim that I heard actually Shel Holtz make on this week's For Immediate Release. And he was discussing with Neville Hobson this whole incident, the statement that you guys had all signed, and the history of Crew, and what he said was, if you're going to see the monetary exchange, material relationship, as a potential conflict of interest, what about social and political issues? And so let me read you this headline here. Lawsuit. Rogue Wikipedia editors conspired to manipulate Wikipedia pages to ruin reputation of philanthropist, charity he co-founded. The suit names 3 Wikipedia editors along with one identified only as Does 150. The lawsuit says that false statements and manipulation of his page cost the former Louie lead singer business to the tune of more than $10 million. Plaintiffs are informed and believe, and they're alleged that the statements published and posted by defendants are defamatory per se, because they are viewed as so serious that they can naturally cause harm and the existence of injuries as presumed from the fact of publication, the complaint alleges. You guys see more stuff like this? You follow these types of developments where someone gets sued for defamation or harassment or discrimination as a result of a Wikipedia page, and if so enforceable, can you walk us through anything related to this?
I had one situation where I had a client call me who was actually nervous about his Wikipedia page because it was too laudatory. It was kind of an unusual situation where he goes, well, I never donated that much money to this, music school, and I never donated this much money to it was a preservation society of some type, right? So, I've actually run into the opposite issue. You do have situations where people are more concerned about accuracy than perhaps burnishing their reputation. But on the other side, I have seen documents in like pretrial discovery and that sort of thing where lawyers and activists were actively telling their clients or constituencies to alter Wikipedia pages. And whether money changes hands or not directly, I mean, that is certainly in my mind a conflict of interest. Nobody, except very few folks who look at the situation from an intellectually honest perspective, very few folks saw that as a quote-unquote conflict of interest, but it most certainly is. And so you see those situations where people have a right to be perhaps concerned about what shows up on the sixth most trafficked website in the world under their name. But I would argue that the so-called this demon troll of paid editing is only a very small part of the problem, that people with conflicts of interest who will either do such things or maybe indirectly there is a monetary concern in that you would imagine if a particular nonprofit organization or activist organization drums up donations based on how effective it is perceived to be. Part of that notion of efficacy might have to do with their ability to alter sites like Wikipedia. So I mean, it is an incredibly complex issue, but unfortunately, it gets conflated with this notion of paid editing, right?
Yeah, and the legal complexities stretch far beyond Wikipedia as an example in particular. There are all sorts of questions about who is or isn't a public figure and what is or isn't permissible in online conversation, because the distinction between what's public communication and what's private communication is a very blurred line these days. And alongside the act of sharing, helping circulate so much information now, I've seen interesting lawsuits filed that questions if you retweet or pass along some information that's certainly incorrect and derogatory toward an individual, what is your culpability in doing so? So I think that conversation has to be put in context of that larger issue. But, one of the things we wanted to do with this statement was to say, too often we're an industry in PR, marketing, communication that focus on compliance and legality instead of ethics, or think of them as interchangeable. And I think part of our question here is to practice empathy. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the audience we're trying to reach, what would they expect from us, and how do we make sure we make good on that? To go back to an earlier question, one of the things we found, it has happened to Peppercom since this statement has come out, and it's happened to other agencies who signed on. There have been Wikipedia editors and others who started going through our history, some of our clients' history, and trying to find examples where they could catch us in a contradiction. And one of the things we tried to forewarn the agency wanting to sign on to this statement is, this isn't an empty gesture. You need to be prepared to sign on and be sure that you'll follow through and are prepared for scrutiny for what you've done in the past as well, because we've already had it happen.
I love this idea of this meeting in D.C. Were you guys there, and were you wearing disguises?
I mean, what was great, and again, hats off to William Butler for getting all of this together. But because, I mean, here we have around the table a group of people who compete pretty, head to head, not only in terms of business, but most definitely in terms of talent, right? In terms of the talent war in public relations, and particularly digital. And I mean, I think that William brought all the right people together. Brought in Wikipedia volunteers of note who kept us honest. Brought in Andrew Lee, I had mentioned a little bit earlier, journalism professor, and again, he wrote that book on Wikipedia. Marcia Vistasso, who now 2 years running, has produced for Penn State the sort of the only research out there about the intersection between public relations and Wikipedia. It was just, I mean, with all those personalities around the table, we could have very easily gotten very derailed, but William he kept us on plan and agenda, and by the end of it, we were nodding our heads about what exactly needs to be done from there.
So I'd like to propose. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say people came into that meeting too. I'll say around the table with their sleeves rolled up, ready to have an honest conversation. There wasn't any posturing by any of the sides involved, and I'll speak for a moment among just the competitive firms that were there. You know, there was not much discussion of here's what we do and how it's better than what you do. None of that happened. There was instead very much this focus that instead of going through a trade organization, if our organizations, and I say this with Peppercom being one of the smallest agencies at the table, and the fact that some of those agencies around the table, you know, the market share that was spoken for at that table was a very significant portion of our industry. There was this agreement that if we made this statement not through an organization first, but as our individual firms and put our own reputations directly on the line with this statement, that we hoped that would be understood as a significant gesture, because I don't know of any situation prior to this where these sorts of agencies involved have come together to do something directly like this outside of an industry trade organization relationship.
So I'd like to wrap this up with the discussion about, Phil, your recent blog post about this, which I thought was so interesting. Your argument was that there are reasons why PR practitioners will only be as good at online community engagement as they are at participating in Wikipedia. So why do you say that?
Because Wikipedia very much hews to the hacker ethos, right? And so the hacker ethos, as crafted by the great innovators that came out of MIT and Stanford, and it's an ethos that governs the open source community, which, as you know, I'm very passionate about. Wikipedia is an outgrowth of that, and it's one of those things where it's amazing that given as many people as with their different interests and agendas that contribute to Wikipedia, that the whole thing doesn't fly apart, right? But one of the things that drives the hacker ethos is a notion of what they call no bogus criteria. And bogus criteria, as defined by the hacker ethos, are things like race, gender, creed, religion, but most relevant here is title and perceived authority. And when you go into an environment like Wikipedia, certainly there's some evidence of some power loss there, that there are some super editors and that sort of thing. But if the company wants to be, or communications department wants to be successful in Wikipedia, they have to take a reliance on authority and hierarchy out of their toolbox. And I argue that public relations is very comfortable with the notion of hierarchy. It's very comfortable with the notion that if there's an assistant editor and there's a scrape going on, that you go up to a managing editor or an editor-in-chief or that sort of thing. It's very used to hierarchy. And what's relevant about Wikipedia is, for the most part, it strips all that away. And it just comes down to how persuasive a case can you make. And frankly, depending on the Wikipedians that you might encounter, how persistent are you in making that case, right? And I think that this isn't an area where you can pay to get more likes and shares or anything like that. It really comes down to the degree to which you can make that argument persuasive on its own terms.
I do like this idea of Wikipedia as a particularly good testing ground or case study for what is a larger lesson to be learned in online community in general. One of the things that frustrates me most is we call our industry public relations, but we've spent a lot of our history as an entity trying to relate to the public as little as possible. So if you think about PR as press relations, there's that focus of really you only need to get to know the journalist covering the space to reach the community you want to reach. And when the online world came through, there was some idea too of only needing to get to know the influencers in a space, right? That the whole notion that there's some shortcut to the actual hard work of listening to and putting yourself in the shoes of the whole public you're trying to reach and get to know them and understand the social dynamics. And I think Wikipedia is a great example where that idea that there's a shortcut and there's one guy you need to know or one person in power to your point, Phil, is stripped away. But that lesson is certainly broadly applicable far outside Wikipedia, and it shows you, why our industry still is so bad at true public relations and other online community spaces as well.
We've been talking to Phil Gomes and Sam Ford. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. And I also want you to tell us where we can find you and connect with you online. Phil, let's start with you.
Sure. You can always find me at Phil Gomes on Twitter. That's PHILGO, M as in Mary, E as in Sam. And everywhere I might publish is wrapped up on philgomes.com.
And I'm on Twitter at Sam_Ford. And I write recurring columns at Inc. and HBR and Fast Company, but if I did it, I'll probably tweet about it. So that'd be as good a place as any.
And we'll have links to their profiles and their writings on the show notes for this podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
me. You've been listening to On the Record Online with Eric Schwartzman, the podcast about how technology is changing the world of communications. To subscribe to the podcast or share feedback, visit us online at ontherecordpodcast.com, on Twitter at ontherecord, or send email to ontherecordpodcast@gmail.com.